Hey guys, so this video is going to be about getting a job as a developer, and in particular focus on those of you guys that don't have a computer science background or are maybe applying for your first job and don't have much work experience. I've been on both sides of this, where I've been the one interviewing candidates for a job and I've also been the one applying for a job. So there's certain things that stood out to me and things that candidates would say that would really help set them apart. So that's what I'm going to talk about today and share a few tips. I personally don't have a computer science background. I've never went through any boot camp or anything like that, so I can only share with you what I've experienced and seen for myself. But I do know there's a lot of people that feel like they can't get a certain job just because they don't have that formal education or work experience. So I'm going to share a few tips that I gave in an interview I did with Pete from nocsdegree.com. So I'm going to link that full interview down in the description. And what Pete does is he just interviews people that have untraditional backgrounds, and in my case, somebody without a computer science degree, and he just shares their story. So I highly recommend you go to that website and check out this interview along with all the other stories that Pete has listed there. And also on that website, Pete has job listings for jobs that don't require a certain degree. So he's always updating it, and I believe this is all over the world where he's finding these jobs. So definitely check that out too, and see if there's any jobs that you can check out that would interest you. And before I get started, there's one question that Pete asked me in this interview that I wanted to focus on, and this was, what advice do you have for somebody who wants to get their first programming job but doesn't have the time or money for a computer science degree? So my background was a little bit different because I don't have a degree, and I just saw an opportunity at the company I was working for and saw the need that they had and was able to create my own position that way. But there was a time when I left that position. I did go through this interview process where I just started applying for jobs just to see what kind of opportunities I would have, what's out there, and I was able to apply for jobs that had computer science degree listed as required. I still took the interview and in multiple cases did very good, was even offered a second interview or the actual position. So I went through this process and noticed a few things that stood out to me. So before I get into that, one piece of advice that I wanted to give people is to look at this whole interview process a little bit different and try seeing it from the interviewer's perspective. They're often making a very expensive decision for their company that can cost them a lot of time and money if you're not the right candidate. So when they get a list of candidates, they're often looking at you along with a bunch of other candidates, usually just a form of a bunch of resumes, and they have to make a decision based off of just seeing what you've done on paper and talking to you. So if you don't have former work experience, if you don't have projects that you can show them, you're not going to compete very well against candidates that only have a computer science degree. And while a computer science degree doesn't necessarily determine whether you're the right fit for the job, it is one indicator that shows that you have some form of background and that somebody has put a stamp of approval on you and says that you pass certain classes, that you have some form of education. So even though I didn't have this background, when I was interviewing people, I would often sift out candidates by projects, by past work experience, and then if they didn't have those, I would look for the degree and prioritize that. So that was kind of my filter process. So look at it that way and understand that if you don't have something, you need to replace that degree with something else. You need some kind of projects or background to replace what a computer science degree can do for you. And another thing I wanted to say is, if you're not getting a degree, you got to realize that this is not a shortcut to getting this job faster or bypassing steps that you have to take. If you don't have the degree, you're often going to have to compete against candidates that do have it. And in many cases, you're going to have to work as hard, if not harder, against people that have invested a lot of time and a lot of money into getting that higher education. So make sure you stand out and respect the process, and don't think that there's shortcuts, but just try to replace it with other things. So this brings me to my first point, which is prove yourself with some kind of projects on that resume that you can talk about in this interview, and show some real world experience that you might have. So this doesn't have to be anything too extravagant, but try to do something that's simpler than just following along a tutorial, maybe some kind of to-do app or weather app. Try going beyond that and think of an idea on your own that you can put together. It doesn't have to be too extravagant, but something that shows that you were able to put together a project from an idea and then go from start to finish and piece something together. This can be a project or maybe some kind of contract work or freelance work that you did for local businesses or companies. but try to put together something worth talking about in this interview process. In my case, I had this really unique work experience in my background, so by the time I got to that interview, and in many cases where the job required a computer science degree, I had them so captivated by the project that I worked on that they were asking me more questions about what I built, what my experience was like, and the tech stack and all those sorts of things, that by the time they got to the actual computer science degree and noticed I didn't have it listed on my resume, I was able to completely bypass that, and they were more interested in how I taught myself and my experience rather than the degree. So they were very forgiving and looked past that once I was able to show them that I was able to move beyond that and still get the job done. So my second point is get an internship if you can. So a lot of people don't have either the skill set or the time to really work on these projects. Maybe they don't have the ideas. It could be a little bit challenging. So if you don't have that, one of the easiest ways to do this is try to apply for a job and get an internship and get some work experience under your belt. This is another scenario where it really helps to look at things from your employer's perspective and understand that nobody wants to be the first ones to try you out and to take that risk on you, especially if you have nothing to show and no work experience. So try to look at it that way and try to gain some experience if you can through internships. Try applying somewhere, whether that's paid or unpaid. Just try to get your foot in the door. I know a lot of us don't have that luxury, but it just might take having to move your schedule around, working a night job or whatever it takes to still get that internship and try to get your foot in the door and get some experience. In many cases, the very company that you're interning for can actually end up needing that position and hiring you for that if you're good enough, or they could just recommend you to another company if a job opens up, or after that internship time frame is over. Let's say you applied for 6 months. When you're going to another company and they see that you've worked somewhere, they can call your former employer, they can call that person that was letting you intern, or just see that you've put the effort forward, that you're doing something. You're not just sitting still and looking for a job, but you're making effective steps to move forward and actually try to pursue this. If you came to me with that kind of position right there, I would definitely take you much more seriously if I saw that you weren't just looking for a job, but you were willing to prove yourself through this process and actually gain that experience. The last piece of advice I have is to learn the technicals of the interview process and the technicals of what you're actually going to be interviewing for. So this is something that really threw me off because I was working for about 2 years and really knew what I was doing. But once I was asked technical questions about things like the core functionality of Django or certain Python methods, it really threw me off because even though I've done it a bunch of times, I knew it in my head, it was hard for me to explain that to another person and really explain why it was done the way it was. And a lot of people don't like this because in my case, I knew it very well, but try to see it from your interviewer's perspective and understand that they have no other way to really understand what you know, even if you have projects that you've worked on. So they're going to ask you these questions, and even though they might not be too harsh on this, and there's actually cases where they might not even ask you these questions, but they're going to use this as another gauge in what you understand, and just to try to see if you're the right fit in working within their company and their environment, because it helps to have people that can verbally communicate things and understand why things are the way they are and can actually explain it. So with that being said, the last thing I wanted to say is don't let not having everything in order stop you from still going on these interviews, going through that process and gaining that experience. And in that process, you never know when you're going to meet someone that's willing to take that chance on you, or just might like you enough in that interview that sees the potential in you and still gives you that job regardless. And if you don't get it, you're still gaining good experience and prepping for future interviews. And when that job comes along where you really want it, if you have this interview process under your belt already and you understand what's going on, what to expect, you're just going to be that much more ready. So don't let it hold you back. Still go on those. And thanks for watching. I hope this helped, and I'll see you in the next video.